Good afternoon, everybody. I'd like to welcome everyone to PUB's Finance Committee. It's 1 o'clock. We do have, excuse me, it's not 1, it's 1 o'clock. I get confused. We're supposed to start at 12 originally. We rescheduled it for 1. So I'd like to welcome Gerardo Martinez as being part of the committee today. We do have a quorum. Do we have any public comments?
No public
No
comments.
public comments. Okay. And then we'll start with item 1 on our agenda. Presentation discussion of the Brownsville Public Utilities Board Financial Performance Report for the period ending October 31st, 2024.
Yes, good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. So my name is Mike Perez. I'm the Chief Financial Officer, and I'll be providing the financial performance as of October 31st, 2024. So here we've got the executive summary, which focuses on 7 categories. Each one has its own gauge meter, green representing good, yellow average, and red poor. So on our flow of funds, we're doing good. We've generated $1.2 million to replenish the improvement fund, and our debt service coverage is at 2.8 times, well above the 1.25 times minimum. And this is just for October, represents the first month of our fiscal year, so it's just the first month. The FPEC is set at 5.019 cents per 1,000 kWh. As mentioned before, we did see a 20% reduction in the FPEC rate in August and another 20% in September. And it has generated about $16.61 million of over recovery, which will be used to offset some future market uncertainty. The COB cash transfer was a little bit lower than budget, but it's within budget, so we're doing well there. Personal and non-personal expenses came in lower than budgeted, primarily due to some current vacancies on personnel, and also the prior year accrual on payroll. The first pay period in October represented 6 days for September, and so because of the year-end audit, we did accrue those 6 days back, and so we do see about a $1.5 million difference between budget and actual in October, that being the primary reason. Now we got the BPUB's average bill is lower than both the average MOU bill and the IOU bill per the 1,000 kWh residential user. Current electric bill is at about $111.26. We got our CIP spending at $1.32 million year to date, which is just 1.7% of the fiscal year 25 approved plan. Just in October, we did report back that we were initiating some improvements. Those improvements began in October, and so we will continue to monitor this, and hopefully we will see some better performance in the upcoming months. And then all key financial metrics are currently in compliance. Here we've got the condensed statement of revenues, expenses, and changes in net positions. This is in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles. We have the current year compared to the same month last year. Starting off with fiscal year 25, we got operating revenues of $19,033,000. Those were $1.7 million less than last year. Base revenues, this decrease represents $1.1 million in base revenue decrease, while the fuel revenues decreased about $600,000. Year-to-date operating expenses of $14,351,000 we did see a decrease there of about $169,000 from the prior year, and those were over various expense accounts. So we arrive at line 3 operating income of $4,681,000. Backing out the net non-operating expenses of $1,816,000, and we arrive at an income before capital contributions of $2,865,000. Now we do see an increase there in expenses in line 4, non-operating expenses of about $1.1 million. And the difference here is we did see some increased interest earnings last year, October, compared to this month because of the lowered interest rates. And we also saw a recording of an invoice for revenue for the fiber utility damages back in October, and so that's why there's a huge disparity there between those two numbers. And so we arrive at line 5, income before capital contributions of $2,865,000. Adding in capital contributions of $452,000, we end up with an increase in net position for the month ending October of 3,318,000. Adding this to the net position at the beginning of the fiscal year, we arrive at a net position at the end of the period of 487,134,000. Here we've got the condensed summary of revenues and expenses. This is based on the flow of funds in accordance with the bond ordinance. We are comparing the current year actual to the year-to-date budget. We got operating revenues, 18,482,000. Those were 2.6 million below budget. The majority of this was there was a decrease of 500,000 in base rates revenue, while the difference of 2.1 million is the fuel and off-system sales decreases from budget. Other revenues were 1,358,000. Those came in 574,000 below budget. So we arrive at gross revenues of 19,840,000. Backing out the fuel and self-most expenses of 6,671,000, we end up with adjusted gross revenues of 13,169,000. Now that big difference in the fuel and SRWA, it's basically just the fuel that I just mentioned, about $1.3 million reduction in the fuel. And so once we back out, we arrive at the adjusted gross revenues of 13,169,000. This is the basis for the city's 10% cash transfer calculation. So the city is entitled to $1,316,000 of that. Backing out other requirements for O&M, non-operating and debt service of 8,430,000, and we arrive at a balance available after requirements of 4,738,000. Backing out the total cash utility benefit to the city, the 1,316,000, 10% of the adjusted gross revenues, and we arrive at a balance available for transfers out or PUB uses of 3,421,000. That 3 million was then used to fund our CIP budget of 2,183,000, leaving a balance of 1,238,000 to replenish our capital improvement fund. That concludes my financial report. Be glad to answer any questions. Other requirements. What did I say it was? Right. Okay, yeah. That majority of that difference represents the difference in the O&M and non-personnel. So I'll just move over to the next slide. We budgeted $5 million. The annual budget for personnel is 60 million. 1/12 is 5 million. We incurred 3.47 million in payroll expenses. That's about a 30% drop, right? $1.5 million, and that basically is because of the accrual that we did for September 30th, year end. That's the major difference there. And then we've got the difference here on the non-personnel side of about $1.2 million, and that's really due to timing. Again, it's because we closed the books early, November the 10th for the October, and so we don't get to accrue those expenses that came in after the 10th of November. So that's basically the difference of that $2.5 million.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
No questions? No. Okay, thank you, Mike.
Yeah, thank you.
Second item on the agenda, presentation and discussion by external auditor Burt McCumber Longoria LLP on progress update on BPUB's 2024 audit.
Yes, so here with us today is Mr. Jose Diaz, Audit Manager with Burt McCumber Longoria, to provide the Finance Committee with a progress update of the fiscal year 24 audit.
Good afternoon, Board. So I'm going to provide an update on it. So I'm glad to report that we have pulled out of the field. We have completed our field work last week, right before the Thanksgiving break. So right now, the status is in review. I'm currently reviewing our staff's work and forecasting. I can send it to partner review by the end of the week. That's the current status on it. Again, your finance department and your departments were great. As we request info, it's been provided, and we haven't had many issues related to anything. Right. So
When's the final report expected?
the final report is expected. If I'm not mistaken, it was for the February meeting. There's still items that the finance department hasn't received. A GFOA report that they usually receive mid to late December, so they still need to get the report done. So right now we're on schedule to the current plan, which was at the February meeting, if I'm not mistaken, right? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Very good. All right, thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Item number 3 on our agenda, presentation discussion of change in accounting for off-system sales.
So yes, again, good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. So I'll be providing an overview of the changes in the accounting for off-system sales. In December of 2010, ERCOT transitioned from a zonal to a nodal electric market, changing the way electricity prices are calculated within the power grid, moving from a system where prices were uniform across large geographical zones to a more granular system where prices vary at individual nodes based on local supply and demand. So this change reflected the true cost of transmitting electricity at specific locations on the grid, resulting in more efficient market operations, improved price transparency, and enhanced grid reliability. So some key points about the transition are that under the previous zonal electric market, BPUB submitted balanced schedules to ERCOT with equal amounts of energy, demand, and generation. Excess generation was sold to other utilities when economical and recorded such transactions as off-system energy sales. These off-system energy sales were scheduled as discrete transactions and accounted for separately from the native load, resulting in revenue not being associated with the retail customers. So the net margin of this off-system energy sales contributed to the replenishment of the Capital Improvement Fund. Funds in the Capital Improvement Fund are used to cash fund projects which benefits customers by reducing the amount of debt issuance. Under the current nodal electric market, ERCOT forecasts loads for the entire system and centralizes generation dispatch. So the balance schedules are no longer submitted to ERCOT, and resource entities offer all generation to ERCOT for centralized dispatch. BPUB resources serve the ERCOT system load, and BPUB no longer balances its customer load with generation. So the traditional concept of off-system energy sales no longer exists in the ERCOT system. BPUB owns and operates its generation as a physical hedge against price volatility in the competitive wholesale market. And so prudent utility practices dictate that any revenue earned in the wholesale market should first be used to reduce the net operating supply cost to provide our customers with the lowest fuel purchase and energy cost rate as possible. This was brought to our attention by our Chief Operating Officer, and we agree with the change in accounting. Our COO actually wrote a white paper on this matter, and I believe that was given to all or shared with all the board members. There is nothing wrong with the current method of reporting for this off-system energy sales, although it is not best practice, right? And so BPUB began to transition to the new utility best practice of reporting all wholesale market transactions as part of the FPEC on a 3-year step process beginning in fiscal year 2025. So in the previous 2 years, BPUB budgeted about $15 million in off-system sales with a 40% margin, right? $6 million margin, pretty much. So in fiscal year 25, what we did is we reduced the budget by 1/3, from 15 down to $10 million. But we did report a 50% margin this time around because that was closer to the 5-year average. And so any revenue, basically any revenue above the $5 million will flow through the FPEC as an offset to the cost recovered from customers. So to put some clarity in this, in fiscal year 24, right? We generated about $8.3 million net margin on those sales. So if that would hold true in fiscal year 25, 3.3 million, which is excess, in the excess of 5 million, would flow to offset those production costs or those power supply costs in FPEC, reducing the rate to the customer, right? And I've got an example that we'll go through in the next slide. So by fiscal year 27, we anticipate all transactions will flow through the FPEC and will no longer report off-system sales. So here, this table pretty much shows what the financials will look like if all the off-system transactions had flowed through the FPEC in fiscal year 2024, right? So we're providing this example here just on the electric non-audited or unaudited numbers as of September 30, 2024. We report on row 3, off-system energy sales were 17,288,159. Further down, around row number 9, the off-system energy expenses were 8,940,218. So on the top right, you see that analysis. We got the off-system sales less the off-system expenses. We ended up with a net margin of 8,347,942. So under the current method of reporting the off-system sales, 10% of that net margin, 834,000, went to the city of Brownsville as part of their 10% transfer calculation. The 90%, $7.5 million, flowed all the way down through as excess revenues, and they flowed into our capital improvement fund. And as mentioned earlier, it benefits the customers in a sense that we use this funds to cash pay for the projects, and so we don't have to issue any debt. So under the proposed, once we transition, you can see that there's going to be an equal reduction in the fuel cost and the fuel revenues. As mentioned in the past, this is a total pass-through, so our revenues and expenses always match. And so there's a reduction there of 8.3 million, which is the net margin on the off-system sales. And it'll reduce the cash transfer to the city, 834,000, and the amount that flows into our capital improvement fund of $7.5 million. So at the very bottom, we can see that the debt service coverage would trickle down to 2.48 times, down from 2.9. Still well in excess of the 1.25 times requirement. And then we can see the actual fuel and purchase energy charge rate for the entire year, right? If we take the net power supply cost divided by the year-to-date KWH, the FPEC all-in rate was at 4.941 cents per 1,000 kWh. Under the current method, it would have gone down to 4.346 cents per 1,000 kWh. In effect, about a 12% reduction in that rate. So this is something that we're transitioning over the next 3 years, and this is the perfect time for it since we are going through an electric cost of service study that we can take into account this transition. Any questions?
I guess just to make sure I understood. So in this example, in the second column, that's assuming 2027?
Right. Assuming 2027, if we had gone all the way in, all of it would have flowed through the power supply or
Yep.
fuel
So
and energy
essentially,
costs.
we before we were paying for the cost of service just with the demand with our local demand. I mean, we were distributing the cost among the standard or what the non-off system, I guess.
Under the current method.
Under the current
Under
method.
current method. Like I mentioned, this is the old way,
Yep.
pre-2010. Again, it's just, there's nothing wrong with it. It was just not prudent utility practice, right? And so under that method, it was all flowing through as excess into the capital improvement fund. It was used to cash fund our projects, and so we issue out less debt.
Yeah.
Right.
And this is being triggered because of the zonal to nodal change?
Right,
Or
right.
we're taking the
just
opportunity?
to follow the ERCOT system business market model.
Okay. But our reporting financials are changing because of that, or we're taking the opportunity to change it based to sync with that change?
Both. I mean, we're having to make the change because, again, we agree with the assessment that was made. It belongs as should be treated as a hedge against the customer production load. And so it's just, the timing is good right now because we are going through the cost
Yeah,
of service.
this is obviously good for our ratepayers, of course, so,
Exactly.
really good.
So, yeah, I have a question. I just want to make sure I understand it, Mike. So before the off-system sales, we're kind of going into a general revenue category, and we could use that money for capital improvements or really anything that we wanted to.
Right.
And now you're gonna get
It
that-
could have been
you're
used
gonna get that-
to pay for our regular O and M
Yeah,
expenses.
and now you're
but-
going to get that margin, and you're just going to apply it to customers' bills to lower their fuel charge.
Correct.
Right. So I guess my question is, like, I just want to make sure I also understand that. What is this, do we have an option to do either or is there's really not an option? We have to follow the new method?
There's not really an option I mean, like I mentioned, it is prudent utility practice. Everything is sold into ERCOT, and then we purchase power from ERCOT. Any excess there really serves as a hedge to our customers.
Right. No, but I guess my question, I just want to make sure, and you don't have to answer right now. I mean, we can talk about it at the board meeting. But, I mean, is it when you say you don't have an option, is it like
It's
an
not a
accounting-
requirement,
Is it
per
an
se.
accounting thing? Is it a regulatory thing? Or is it just trying to match revenues and expenses in a better manner, but it's not really required through GAAP?
Right. We're just trying to match, place the benefit in the proper bucket, right? It needs to go and serve as a hedge to the customer's production
Okay.
cost.
And what triggered this? I mean, why all of a sudden the change? Why hadn't we done this before, or?
Right, it was brought up to our attention by our COO.
Yeah.
This
Okay.
is-
And how come, like, our financial auditor didn't catch this? And, and they're very good at what they do, but in an audit report, if you're not properly categorizing revenues and expenses, would they ever, I don't think they've ever made a recommendation.
No, they haven't, not since 2010. The auditors never brought this to our attention.
Can I, Mark Dombrowski? So the way it's currently accounted for, it's not GAAP, generally accepted accounting principles. It's not a violation of that. It's just what is the best practice in the electric industry in ERCOT. And so the notion of off-system sales doesn't exist anymore. And so we were going through an extra calculation, to actually calculate what they would be had we been operating under the old zonal market. And so the whole notion of a deregulated power market was precipitated these changes in ERCOT. And so I just discussed this with Mike about transitioning from off-system sales to containing all of the revenue that's produced in ERCOT as a physical hedge against the power costs that we incur from ERCOT. So it's more of a kind of a matching principle, but we're not violating any sort of accounting. It's not something the auditors would look at and say you violated GAAP or there's a GASB that you're violating. It's just a best practice in the utility industry.
Okay. And how did y'all come up with the one-third kind of transition?
We just wanted to take that type of approach so it wouldn't affect.
3 years.
Again, like you had mentioned earlier, those funds could be used to offset some of the O&M expenses. We haven't seen any rate increases since 2016 on the electric side. It's been 8 years or so, and so we just wanted to ensure that we had adequate coverage, right? And so we figured we'll take it in pieces, a third a year. It doesn't mean that we can go 100% full this coming year in 26, rather than wait till 27. But that was the main reason. It's
Sure.
just the effect that it would have had under for the debt service coverage.
Okay, thank you. Anything else? Very good. Well, thank you, Mike. Okay, moving on to item number 4, presentation discussion on budget amendment for funding of the Brownsville Public Utilities Board Power Supply Stabilization Reserve in accordance with Utility Financial Reserve Policy.
Yeah, so good afternoon to Chair, members of the committee. So as reported, if you all recall, last month, we brought to the board, or the board approved the utility financial reserve policy, which allowed BPB to absorb short-term financial variability resulting from unexpected operating results or can reduce the need for debt issuance. So the policy includes the establishment of a power supply stabilization reserve for mitigating power supply cost volatility, which causes frequent variation in the fuel purchase and energy charge at FPEC. The power supply stabilization reserve is targeted to maintain a cash equivalent of 90 days of net power supply cost. The full funding of this reserve will be accomplished incrementally over a period of approximately 10 years as per policy. And it does allow as allowed through the flow of funds in the annual budget. So in order to accomplish this is the first year of funding for fiscal year 25, staff will be taking to the board a budget amendment to decrease funding for electric capital projects by $2.2 million and to fund the power supply stabilization reserve. So in essence, we had initially estimated that the cost would be at 90-day reserve would be about $22 million. So we're figuring, okay, $2.2 million needs to be funded for the entire year. Over 10 years, we can reach that $22 million. And that'll fluctuate year to year, and we can evaluate that on an annual basis. But basically what this budget amendment does, it reduces the amount that's gonna go to CIP funding and provides it or moves it over to the reserve. So we'll be taking this to the board next Monday for approval, and that's all. Any questions?
Nope.
No questions, thank you.
All right, thank you.
Item number 5, presentation, discussion regarding progress of the advanced metering infrastructure project.
Before we begin, some of you may not have been here when we first started the AMI project, and the previous board and some of the members who were here before requested for us to do periodic updates of the AMI and where we were at. And so we're at a point in time where Eddie is now going to be giving you an update, and it's up to you all to say how often do you want us to include an update and provide to you.
Okay.
Good afternoon, members of the board. I guess the first thing in the update that I wanted to point out, which isn't on here, is Mr. Jaime Aguilar. He will be heading up our new AMI department. So I figured since we're investing $30 million in this, it'd probably be a good idea to have somebody to shepherd this once it's implemented and moving forward. So we're creating a new AMI department, and when I was sitting there, it kind of occurred to me that's probably the biggest thing we did. So Jaime's in charge of that effort, and he'll be the center of that. As a brief update, some of the things that we've been working on, the head-end systems. The head-end systems are the systems from Badger and LNG that actually incorporate the meter reads. They're being provisioned, or they're being stood up right now. The meter data management system, then the head-end passes that information over to the meter data management system, which is like the big database that it's the traffic cop that then passes all the information to all the other systems. So we're getting that rolling. The electric meter bench testing, is that complete? That's actually complete. So we have about, 20 different meters? 20 different electric meters, different flavors of meters that PUB uses for residential, commercial, various different types. Those meters, we bring them in, we test them. Once they're, then PUB signs off on it that yes, we accept this, and from that point forward, this is the meter we're going to be using. So that's been done, and once we get that information is passed on to the electric department, and then they start purchasing those meters from this point forward. So you'll actually see that, some of the first inventory purchases for the coming year. That way, as we replace meters now, they'll be compatible with the new system, and we're not throwing money away. On the water meter side, they're going through that bench testing, and then we have the water and electric meters are on order for the initial deployment area and the full deployment. We're working through some of our organizational change management systems throughout the system. Over the past year, we met with different areas of staff like customer service, billing, collections, electric meter department, water meter department, on how AMI is going to change the business. So some of that change management is actually occurring. We're starting to implement some of that. We're also working with marketing on the customer engagement plan, because as we begin in March, obviously that's going to start to affect our customers, and we're kind of refreshing, okay, what's the plan? How are we going to do this? How are we going to communicate with them? How are we going to advertise this? And so forth. And then I just mentioned the staffing plan. We thought, okay, hey, we're going to have to make sure that this thing has a life of its own and continues forward and just doesn't sit there. And that's step one, was get somebody in charge of that. So we've done that. Oops. How do I back up? Just in general, the project's going well. That's the good news. But like anything, there's always some risk involved. So some of the project risk that we're looking at right now are change orders due to the initial delay. The initial delays in the project were when we changed legal firms about a year or so ago. We were about 80% complete with the first firm, then we stopped and switched to Spencer Fane. They've done a great job, but obviously that caused a delay. And then we lost our contracts person internally at PUB and had to rehire and get moving on that effort. So we have a couple of delays there. That'll be the SmartWorks and Landis & Gear, the project management teams. We need to keep them on. We needed to engage them and hold them for the project. And the delay caused a little bit of issue there. The second thing is the delay also pushes back when we're going to take the meters, because we lost about 9 months total in those two efforts. So on the Badger side, it's a CPI increase on the physical cost of the meters, so that's about 3.9%. So some of these items will be coming to the board in the near future. The other item that we're looking at, of all the things in all the world, is the lid replacement. Lids for the water meters. You have to drill them, and then the radio goes through the meter, and then you connect it to the water meter to the radio. We issued that contract about 4 or 5 months ago, I think back in July, and the contractor is just having issues actually producing the lids. But without those lids, we're kind of stuck. So we're working on that right now. We're trying to rework our timelines a little bit and do some juggling. But all these problems are easily addressable, and there are no deal stoppers in here, or show stoppers. So that's the good news. Some of the milestones, this kind of gives you a quick overview of some of the completed items and what's going to be occurring in the near future. So we've completed obviously we completed contracting, the meter orders, the network orders, et cetera. Some of the next steps are where we're actually beginning the implementation of the systems themselves. As I was saying, the head-end systems from Badger and Landis & Gear and SmartWorks. Then after that, in March of 2025, we'll actually begin some of the installation of the physical aspect of it, the 18 gateways and 33 routers. So that's the communication system that'll be throughout the city that the meters will actually talk to. On the electric side. On the water side, they're all cellular, so there's no communication system needed there. But that'll all begin in March. And then in April, we begin installing the meters. And then in May, we begin to cut over and do some of the business integration and testing on the business processes. So those are the things that are coming up in the near future. As an overall schedule, this is kind of, where are you now? We're kind of in the middle of the project at the moment, or we're fully 1 year in. So we've got another about year and a half of this to 2 years. But it's, like I said, things are progressing pretty well. We haven't seen anything major pop up, which is good. And as far from a budget perspective, we're pretty much on track. The amendments that are coming through, the biggest amendment that will come through is going to be the CPI increase on the meters themselves, because that's $11 million, $12 million of meters, so 3%, 3.6% of that is significant. We're still doing final negotiations on that increase with Landis & Gear, or I'm sorry, that's Badger, with Badger. But the increases that I mentioned are covered in our contingency budget. So the total project budget, we're not going to come knocking on the door just yet. So far, we're still good. Everything else is in line. We're really going to just start gearing up right now. As you can see, the total project budget is about 29.7 million. We spent about 2.1 million, and we're still in pretty decent shape. Any questions?
Let me add something on here. We have a Water Smart, the fund that we did receive for the water side, and I don't know if you want to bring it up, but I'm not sure if the money that we have received, we have some grant funding available.
That's right. As I remember, this budget, thank you. This budget was approved by the $29.7 million budget was approved by the board originally. Subsequent to that, we had applied for 2 grants, one at 2.5 million and another for 5 million from WaterSmart. We were lucky and lucky and good. We received a $5 million grant on the water side, hence WaterSmart. So we have those funds that are helping subsidize the project.
So in other words, you know, it's most of it's being funded by our CIP plans, our capital improvement fund that we just discussed, but now we have less money available, less money being utilized from the CIP available to other projects since we're doing that. We're still actively looking for other areas of grant funding that could apply for other portions. Of course, the things that have started, they don't exactly give us grants for, but if you catch them at the right place, you might be able to get other funding opportunities out there.
Very good.
Yeah, I remember it's been a while, but we were discussing the budget a lot. I guess there were some board members, right, that are kind of focused on that overall number. So I anticipate questions. I think we also discussed that grant, and we weren't sure how that was going to play, right? Is the total still going to be the same even with the grant, or are we going to use it to say, well, we're staying within budget even though we're spending more? I'm sure you're going to get those questions, so just anticipate that for the bigger board. And then on the 3%, that was just because of the delays in ordering, or what was the contract, or
Typically the way it works with the material, when you sign the contract, this is the price this year. And then every year it increases by whatever the CPI number is.
and that's in the contract, that 3%? Yeah, you might want to check.
Yeah, the actual number, I don't think the actual number itself is within the contract, but it's typically the lesser of either CPI or what their actual price market increase is. And in this case, the CPI is less. But what we're in the process of doing now is trying to negotiate that number lower. But yeah, the increase itself is stated in the contract.
Mm-hmm. So it's incorporated into the contract, but we're having to use that clause, I guess, because of a delay in ordering?
Well, what happens is
I mean, could we have ordered everything up front, or that doesn't make sense, or?
No, you can't. When we did the original project schedule, it assumed that the legal part of it, legal review would take so long and contract review would take so long. Unfortunately, it took longer. It took about 9 months longer for PUB because of just some of the issues that we were going through at the time. So that pushes the whole schedule back 9 months. So that pushes you back into the next year. And it's like saying, I want the new model of car, and they'll sell you the new model, but at the new year's price, not at the old year's price.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So every year, whatever we need, like, we will place an order for what we can install, what our installers can put in the ground and on the houses, electric and water.
So we'll never have a full inventory of everything we're going to buy as we deploy, and the price is going to be changing continuously. Maybe a smaller amount overall, because if we bought half.
Correct. What you're buying, it shrinks. So
Yep.
next year at this time, we'll be telling you about the 2026 increase based on whatever amount we have left,
Sure.
whatever quantity we have left.
Yep.
Now, we are, to that point, we are looking at, we're toying with the different ideas of, okay, is there any way that we can take the whole order forward? But there are other issues that we have to cover there, because if you take them forward, then the problem is, then the warranty on the meters and the devices start clicking. In other words, you have X number of months to actually install them, and because remember, there are communication devices inside each meter, electric and water. So then when you take it, you need to install it, and then it for lack of a better term, it lights up, and your warranty starts clicking, and you start paying for that service. So there are different factors that we're looking at there. Does it make sense to take them early and pay this, or is it better to just take them when we need them? And by the same token, the other factor that we're looking at is, can our installers actually install them? We spoke to them this past week, and they're looking at their schedule. Our project manager for the installer basically told us, yes, because look, I know what they're going to tell you. They're going to tell you, yes, they can, because obviously my company wants to make money, and the sooner we do it, the more money the quicker we make that money. He goes, I'm telling you, do you really want to do that? Because it's going to really increase the number of meters that are going into the ground and the impact that the public's going to see. Do you have the call center staffed up to take those calls? Do you have your back office people set up to be able to do that? He goes,
Yeah, and
basically,
the reason I'm just highlighting that is, again, it's going to go back to the budget number, right? The not to exceed.
Yeah.
So just have that information available as part of the discussion that in the rollout, it's anticipated, to have the increase in price. Yeah, so it was expected. So.
and like I said, right now, those increases will be covered by the contingency fund within the budget, if that helps.
Yeah, so the budget, if it was 30 and you got 5 mil, so the new budget is 25, or the budget now is 35, taking into account the
If you
round
look-
numbers.
Yeah, if you look
w-
on the total budget column, if you look down at the bottom, the total project budget is 29.7. If you
Let's
look at
call
the-
it 30,
yeah,
just
let's
for
call it
just for
30.
numbers.
If you look at the second to the last line, part of that 30, we have 2.4 million in contingency. So we're expecting about a $400,000 increase on the $450,000 increase on the Badger side. That's far and away the largest. So it's going to chew away at our contingency budget. But then that's for the entirety of next year.
Okay, so we still have 2 million in contingency.
We're going to end up with probably about 1.8 to 1.7 million left.
Okay,
I can throw some estimates in there.
and
we
that's
can
not
update that.
including the grant money that you received.
Let me answer that question. So,
'Cause
the budget is $30 million. 5 million is coming from the grant, the other 25 million from internal cash.
Okay,
Yes, unfortunately, it wasn't 29 plus 5. It was 29 minus 5, so we're going to give you 24.
yeah. Yep. That's what I was getting at, right? Just trying to understand, so. Again, I'm okay. You're probably gonna get some questions.
Understood. Any other questions?
No, it's a good project. It's just multi-year, so we'll keep tracking. And as far as frequency, I think we can continue whatever, is it twice a year that we're doing? I think that's fair.
Will do. Do you want to take a similar, shorter presentation to the full board where we're at? We're happy to do that, whatever the committee
Well-
feels, or we can just continue it at committee, we can continue it at committee. I have
Um,
agenda review with the chair at 4, so I can discuss it with him at that time.
Yeah, I think Art will probably have to decide on that.
Okay.
I would put it in consent, just to make sure that we have the available, but I know you probably have questions, so.
Sure, I agree.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, item number 6, presentation on transmission of electricity and electric reliability, Council of Texas.
Good afternoon, Mark Dombrowski, the Chief Operating Officer. So as you know, transmission is a big part of our business, and I'm going to kind of go through that today with you. The roles that BPUB plays in transmission, how we collect those costs and how we pay for the expenses, how we deal with ERCOT and the PUC, how we're currently accounting for the costs and revenues, and an alternative approach that might be considered when Mr. Perez brings the cost of service model results to you. So the first is ERCOT is big. It's about 90% of Texas, covers most of Texas. And when we talk about transmission, we're really talking about the transmission that serves within ERCOT. And it's completely regulated by the Texas PUC. There are a lot of different providers and participants within ERCOT. And today I'm really going to be talking about transmission service providers and distribution service providers, and really how does Brownsville PUB play in those roles. Just for clarification, a transmission and distribution service provider is one of the big four. So that's Oncor, AEP, Texas Mexico Power, and CenterPoint. So those are, they call them the TDSPs. Everyone else that has transmission is just a transmission service provider. So price regulation in ERCOT is really what I'm referring to today right now. So our generation of power, that's a competitive wholesale market. So all the generators are competing to sell their power to customers. And so that's a competitively priced commodity. Transmission within ERCOT, it's an open access market. It's socialized. Everyone, all the generators have access to those transmission lines to serve customers at the other end. And so that is highly regulated by the Public Utility Commission of Texas. Those prices are set there. And then on the distribution side, for Brownsville, we have a non-competitive market that's regulated by both our board of directors and our city commission. And that's how each of them are regulated. So I'm kind of trying not to confuse myself here. So there are a lot of different things that happen in order for us to get power when it comes to transmission. So first we have, as I said, the Public Utility Commission. They provide the oversight and set the regulations for the market. They set the transmission rates that the transmission service providers can charge. ERCOT determines what's called four coincident PINC, which I'll cover a little bit later, but it is the basis for how much money is collected from each transmission service provider. So it's a calculation that ERCOT does and gives to the PUC. The PUC prepares what's called a transmission charge matrix, which I'll get into as well as later. And that tells all the transmission service providers how much they can charge the distribution service providers, so they can exchange of funds there. Next, our city commission, they set retail rates. That's how we collect the money to pay for the transmission piece. ERCOT, they manage the grid to ensure reliability and stability. Qualifying scheduled entities, they schedule the power for the customers. What Mr. Perez was talking about earlier, they call the ERCOT and say, I need so many megawatts within this interval. The resource entities or the generators, they're bidding. Remember, it's a competitive market. They're bidding, and ERCOT figures out what's the lowest price point I can pay to get enough power that all these people have scheduled. I need to deliver that power. And then ERCOT goes out and tells those generators, all right, you dispatch. They schedule that power for the grid. Those resource entities, they're supplying the power to the grid. They're sending it through the transmission service providers, who then transmit it down to Brownsville. They also collect the transmission cost of service, what it costs them to deliver that power, as well as a rate of return, via that transmission charge matrix. Brownsville pays those transmission service providers via that transmission charge matrix. We distribute the power to our customers and we send them a bill, and finally our customers pay the bill. So a lot goes on, and this is just really focusing on ourselves as a distribution service provider. As I said, we're both a distribution service provider as well as a transmission service provider. So how we behave as a transition service provider is very similar. PUC still sets the regulations. They still set the transmission rates, including our rates. ERCOT determines that for CP. PUC sets the matrix expense. ERCOT manages the grid. Our QUESI, or distribution service provider schedules that power. They bid the power, ERCOT schedules it. The generators provide the power to the grid. We transmit that power to the distribution service providers, and we collect a transmission cost of service expense via the transmission charge matrix. And the DSPs, the distribution service providers, pay us via that transmission charge matrix. And what you'll notice is BPUB retail customers are not a part of this value chain. It happens without them. So it is really a standalone business, and that gets the basis of the rest of this presentation. So our transmission system is really a rather small system within ERCOT. It's mostly used to move power around our service territory. Anything over 60 kV is called transmission, and so we have 69 kV and 138 kV lines. And you can see that it interacts with other transmissions as we move power from generators down to serve our customers. As I pointed out, it's a pretty small piece of transmission system. It's at the end of the line, so there's no one on the other side of us. We have to file in order to collect our revenue on transmission with the Public Utility Commission of Texas. It's a highly regulated business. And if you're really bored, I've given you the exact part in the state statute where you find all these rules. But the biggest thing is we do a transmission cost of service study. We have to submit that to the PUC. They review that. They approve the funds. We have to do that on a periodic basis. The last time we did it, you'll see a little bit later, is in 2022. Some utilities go 5, 10 years without ever doing a transmission cost of service. We can do it voluntarily when we want to change our rates, or the PUC compel us. They can call us in and say, you need to change your rates. And I'll get on the reasons why they do that later. There's also an interim update. And so within the PUC, every transmission service provider twice a year can go to the PUC and say, we've invested more in transmission assets, and so we want to change what we charge. They can't change the O&M component or the rate of return component. It's only for assets that are put in service or retired. All your other cost elements remain the same. And finally, each year we have to go back to the PUC and submit an earnings monitoring report. So this is the way that the PUC checks on us to make sure that we're not over-earning on the transmission. If you are over-earning, then you will get called before the PUC to do another transmission cost of service. That's how they regulate us. The rate case, there's several steps. The first is we have to submit it as a very detailed cost of service. We usually hire a consultant to help us on this, but we file, basically we open up the books and we tell them this is what we need to charge on a per KW basis. We have to notify everyone, all the distribution service providers within ERCOT get a notice that we filed this case. The PUC staff, they're accountants and economists, and engineers, they dig through that. They look for anything that they believe is not appropriate or in excess. There's intervention. One of those distribution service providers can come in and say, we don't agree with Brownsville PUB's cost of service, and this is the reason why they actually file an intervention with it. If there's contested issues, either from an intervener or the PUC, they have what's called administrative hearings, much like a lawsuit or a court case. They have an administrative law judge, they hears it, they hear evidence, they take testimony, and that administrative law judge then makes a recommendation about what those rates should be, and that goes to the commission, 3-member PUC. That PUC decides what the rates will be. They can approve it, modify it, or reject it and tell you to start over again. And then finally, once that PUC approves the rates, they approve our tariffs. We publish those tariffs, and we can start collecting revenue on those tariffs and reporting against those tariffs. I pointed out the last time we did a cost of service study, it was docket 51536. It was approved on January 14th of 2022. Those are the rates we're using today. We used our financials from fiscal year 2019 to justify those cases. So they're now coming up on 6 years old, 5 years old? 5 years old. So you can tell that inflation, all that over time. So we will be probably filing for another transmission cost of service pretty soon here to update those costs. We have not made any interim updates to our cost of service. So again, that's only for assets put in service or retired. We have a relatively small system. Some large transmission service providers do that on a regular basis, but we have not done that. So we now have an approved tariff, we can now start collecting those revenues from distribution service providers. So the PUC does that with this transmission charge matrix that they calculate each year. That determines how much we can charge each of the distribution service providers. I didn't do a count of them, but I'm guessing there's probably more than 100 of them within Texas. So there's a lot of money going between parties here. And this matrix, it's what manages that. So each year, ERCOT collects and reports that for coincident peak demand from each of the distribution service providers, and I'll show you how they do it in a minute. That data is used to allocate all of those transmission costs, right? So all these transmission service providers, they've submitted their transmission service costs through their rate filings. That totals the total cost of transmission. The PUC collects all those costs based upon that 4CP, that's June, July, August, and September. They calculate these matrix, which I'll get to in a minute. That determines how much revenue is going to be collected by each of the transmission service providers and how much each of the distribution service providers have to pay based upon their 4CP. And finally, the commission approves that matrix and they mail it out, and everyone starts exchanging money. There's a couple calculations here. So first is what is received by transmission service provider. So that's your approved transmission cost of service, which I just went through on our side, divided by the average for coincident peak for ERCOT, divide it by 12 to get to a monthly rate, and you multiply that times each distribution service provider's average 4CP. And I'll show you in a minute how it looks kind of strange. You'll have sometimes you hear us refer to a postage stamp rate. That is the calculation of the total cost of all transmission service providers' cost of service divided by the average 4CP. And the reason why they call it a postage stamp is kind of like when you mail a letter. It doesn't matter if you're sending power from Hidalgo to Brownsville or you're sending from Hidalgo to Lubbock. It costs the same per kW, just like a postage stamp. So it's socialized, and that's where that name comes from. And finally, there's a distribution service provider. So that's what you have to pay, and that's that postage stamp rate times your average for coincident peak. So for coincident peak, so ERCOT is a summer peaking utility, which means it uses most of its demand during the summer months. And they consider June, July, August, and September as the summer months. And whatever the maximum number of kW that are being demanded is at that peak. And so all the infrastructure, the transmission system, has to be built in order to deliver that much kW, right? That's the only time it's used as maximum capacity. The rest of the year, it's underutilized. And so that's why they used for coincident peak as its peak. And they take the previous year, so in this example, this is the average 4CP for the summer of 2023. You can see the exact day and hour that the system peaked. The red line is ERCOT. The blue bars are Brownsville. And so you can see where we peaked relative to ERCOT. We had a really high peak in July relative to ERCOT, and the rest of the months we were lower. And then they take that average. So in 2023, our average was 288 megawatts of demand, and that was used for our 4CP. And that equates to 0.34526 of the total ERCOT, right? So you can think of it, all of those transmission costs that ERCOT collects, or that the transmission service providers collect, we have to pay 0.34526 of that, because that's how much our share of the demand is. So it goes intuitively, if you can lower your demand, your 4CP, you can lower the amount you spend. The good news is I look back over the last 5 years, our share of ERCOT's 4CP has decreased each year. And that's mostly because ERCOT's growing faster than we are. But if we could lower just even that July, if we get that below that red line there, we could lower the amount we have to pay all the other distribution service providers. In theory, if you get zero, you would have no costs associated with your transmission, right? So that's one thing we need to work on. So this is an actual extract of the transmission charge matrix from the PUC. And I've deleted some rows and columns just to capture a few of these. And the red part I've highlighted, so those are the things associated with Brownsville Public Utilities. So the vertical, the distribution service providers, that's a list of all the distribution service providers and what they have to pay to the transmission service providers, which are listed on the top axis there. And so you'll see that AEP does both their distribution and transmission. So they have both a column and a row. If you look over there, BART is the city of Bartlett. They do not own any transmission. So they collect $0 from all the distribution service providers. If you look on LCRA, Lower Colorado River Authority, they own transmission, but they are not a distribution service provider. So they collect money from everyone, but they don't pay anybody. In Lubbock, that's the most recently added one, just to show you how this works. I am almost positive that no electrons travel from Brownsville to Lubbock. But because it's socialized and they use 4CP, that's how the costs are. So we collect costs from Lubbock and we pay costs to Lubbock now. A little bit easier way to look at this is on these columns. So the first one is, as a distribution service provider, we have to pay those transmission service providers. That is unrelated to owning transmission. We would have to pay that even if we own no transmission. So you'll see there again, we're paying Bartlett nothing because they don't own transmission. And you'll see that we are receiving money from the matrix simply because we own transmission. And we would receive those monies even if we weren't a distribution service provider. So it's unrelated to retail load. And that shows up that Lower Colorado River Authority, we don't have to, we don't receive anything from them because they are not a distribution service provider. And then what the matrix really does, for convenience of administrative and cash flow purposes, they take these, they net them out, right? So you owe some, others owe you, and they net it out, and then they divide it by 12 so that money doesn't have to get all paid up front, right? It's paid out over the 12 months. And you can see here that a monthly payment for AEP, negative is revenue. So we pay AEP $133,698.42 every month for use of the transmission system. Austin Energy, they pay us $3,881.67 every month. And that's how the checks are exchanged. So how do we account for this? And again, it's kind of like over time things have changed, but so historically we've taken the retail customer expenses, so that's what we have to pay those transition service providers for the socialized costs. We net that out against the receipts from all the distribution service providers that we're getting. We net that amount. If it's a net expense, meaning someone we have to pay, like an AEP, that flows through the fuel and purchase energy charge, and we collect that from the retail customers. So that obviously increases the FPEC rate. If it's a net receipt, that means money we receive, like from Austin Energy, they pay us $3,800 a month. That money gets booked as non-operating revenue. So that increases the revenue of the utility, and it does decrease what we have to collect in base rates because it's a revenue source, right? We don't have to collect it in retail rates. Outside of that, we're accounting for those transmission costs of service, that wholesale transmission, what it costs us, those T costs to operate the transmission system. That's in operating expenses, and that's offset by operating revenues, which is collected in retail base rates. So because there's cost in there, that increases base rates. And how it flows through a customer's bill is we have what we call the energy consumption. And so that's based upon KWH. That is collecting those net receipts and the wholesale T cost. So any expenses there will increase that number you see on the customer's bill. And that net expense, that flows through, again, the fuel and purchase energy charge. So you'll see that on the customer bill. But you'll notice with all of this, there's nothing on a customer's bill about transmission. And it's a huge piece of how we move electricity and our expenses and our revenues. But you don't see that on a customer bill. So So I've got a recommendation. I always joke I have a Texas public school education, so I like to keep things simple. So a common practice is we have these expenses, right? So those are all those payments we're making to the transmission service provider, the socialized expenses to use the transmission. Those are usually collected in some sort of fee called a transmission access fee or a regulatory fee. If we were to set that up on a customer bill, you would then see transmission. It's a pass-through expense. We don't collect anything more than what we need to pay those transmission service providers. It's a pass-through. So that would decrease the customer's fuel and purchase energy charge because it wouldn't be collected through there anymore. We would have to create a transmission access fee on a customer's bill. It'd be transparent. They would know what they're paying for. It would align cost causation, right? If we can lower our 4 commercial or our 4 CP, then we can lower customer bills. That's that cost causation. It aligns revenues with their associated cost because now you're collecting those specific revenues with this cost with the specific revenue. And this, like I said, it's a common practice in Texas. And then we look at transmission as it is, as a separate business. We have our transmission cost of wholesale transmission regulated by the PUC. We have those costs now. We would use the revenues that we collect from distribution service providers. We're billing all of them. We should always be collecting more than it costs us because we get a rate of return from the PUC. And so what that does, that creates a separate transmission as a distinct business unit. That aligns those revenues with the associated cost. Now you can see exactly, making sure that we're operating our transmission efficiently, we're getting a rate of return for our customers. It aligns cost causation, and it would decrease customer base rates because all those monies that we collect in excessive cost can be used to offset the cost we need to collect from our retail customers. And so the more money we collect on transmission, the more efficient we operate the system, the lower our customers' bills can be on the retail side. And so I think we're talking with our ratepayer or our rate design consultants and looking at this, and we'll kind of bring you back before the full board a concept to look at this and determine whether the board wants to go in this direction. That's it.
Just on the, you have here retail transmission access fee. It's a common practice in Texas, right?
Yes.
Is that also common practice for the transmission wholesale operations? Or that's not applicable?
I couldn't hear your second part.
Is that also common, the transmission wholesale operations? It's not applicable to that?
Right. So in Texas, all distribution service providers are not transmission service providers. And so I didn't say it was common because you have these that aren't both.
Yeah.
But if you're a transmission service provider, that is your business.
That's your business,
Yeah.
so that's going to happen.
Exactly.
Okay. And the other thing is that I want to make sure I understood this, just one point, but so the cost is really kind of based off your utilization level?
Right. So you get your approved cost recovery, that's your T cost,
Yeah,
and that's on a per KW basis.
right,
And they go to all of the demand within ERCOT.
right. But
And they
we have
say-
to file that paperwork?
Yes.
Okay,
We file paperwork with the PUC. We tell them what our cost is, including all costs to operate, and they approve that. They did that in 22, and they said, all right, you can charge so much per KW. I
Yeah.
think it's actually on here. So you'll see your average 4CP per KW, the charge up there, right? So we get 13.8873 cents per KW. Yeah, that's right. So that's what we can collect. And then they multiply that times the average 4CP, which in this case is 288,490. So,
okay.
yep.
Yeah, I'm just still trying to absorb everything.
It's a lot. Hope I didn't confuse you.
Yeah. So thinking about it from the ratepayer perspective, I mean,
Yes.
we'd see a transmission line cost, and that would be a fixed cost across everyone per kilowatt hour, or
Yes.
that would vary depending on how much you would use in those 4 CP, how
Right.
much you contribute on those particular days.
Right. So for most utilities, and including us, it would be each year would be a fixed cost, because every year the transmission matrix charge changes, and so we recalculate it. And Our costs would either increase or decrease based upon our 4CP and all of the costs that are filed with the PUC with the other transmission service providers. We would then collect it through our customers. For the residential and small businesses, we collect all charges on an energy basis, which is KWH, right? So it'll be a charge per KWH. For large commercial businesses, we would collect it on a KW basis. And again, you remember that this is based upon KW, and so large commercial industries would have an incentive to decrease their peak demand. We could actually call them and say, we expect peak demand today. Could you decrease your load by so much percentage during that hour? And if they did so, we would decrease our share of 4CP. We could then decrease our cost for the rest of the entire year. So it sends that price signal to the customers.
Yeah, but the cost reduction would be for that particular company, I guess, and or it would be spread out across everyone.
Spread out across everyone, right?
Another important thing to note is this is something that other publicly owned power also uses as a strategy to reduce costs. By investing in transmission, we have a guaranteed rate of return that everybody has in the state of Texas, and we're able to increase our revenues for this utility. So that's another strategy that other public power, which is why when somebody says, why is somebody in North Texas having a lower rate? Well, they may be heavy built on transmission, that they're using that as a strategy to reduce your customer costs. So the reason we're bringing this here is we're in the process of doing a cost of service study, and we want to be aligned with the rest of the industry and how we collect for revenues in the state of Texas, so everybody understands where our three business models are, not just water and wastewater and electric, but really within the electric utility cost of service model, you have a distribution, you have your transmission, and then you have your generation. And so that's the intent here, is for everybody to understand and for us to decide, so how can we reduce our customer bills and how can we reduce, help everybody out in the community in our investments, so.
This is complicated, right? I mean, to you, it's, you know, I know you know it, Cole, but for us, and I guess, so I just want to make sure I understand again that every year you're filing you're having filings with ERCOT, I guess, and
So
to determine the transmission cost for that year?
no, so the only time we,
He might be asking about the 4CP and
So
the
we
4CP.
file-
The 4CP.
yeah, so the transmission costs we get to recover are through the Public Utility Commission of Texas, and those only change when we file with the PUC. We haven't filed since 2002, right? So those stay the same every year. What changes each year is the postage stamp rate and the 4CP. So to the extent we had a real reduction in our 4 coincident peak, our 4CP, the amount of money we need to collect from our retail customers to access the transmission system would decrease,
Sure.
right? If everyone's making big investments in transmission, and this happened several times, it's going to happen again pretty soon, then all these transmission service providers, they're filing with the PUC to collect more money, right? And those costs get socialized and get spread amongst all the DSPs. And so that postage stamp rate changes as those average cost is. But our rate doesn't change until we file with the PUC.
I think, to me, I'm, Mark, to be honest, I think I'm going to have to sit down with you and go through this again. That's not going to happen right now because,
It is.
to me, it's like, well, if the costs are going to increase, you just never file. But I'm sure it's a lot more complicated than that. So
Again,
we'll-
you almost have to think about it's 2 different businesses.
Yeah,
Right?
so we'll,
Yeah.
I think it's a very good introduction. You know, obviously, we need to learn more about it, and so we'll do that maybe on an individual basis.
Okay.
Probably.
As the state of Texas grows and as more customers comes online, then
Sure.
that can also be a reduction to us, because if we don't grow, then it's all codependent.
Absolutely. Thank you.
I
very
would
much
add
for your
that
presentation.
for our size of utility, we are now required to file every 8 years.
Okay.
We have to. Before, we didn't have to. We could stay with the same rate
Right.
year after year.
Yeah. Some utilities want 20 or 30 years without ever changing a rate
Yeah.
filing, so.
Yeah.
And as long as you're not over-earning, the PUC didn't call you in, but now they're calling folks in on a regular
Right.
basis. places.
Okay, very good.
All right.
Thank you, Mark. Okay, I think that's it for our regular agenda. We're going to recess to close meeting to consider matters pursuant to Texas Government Code Chapter 551. We have one item on our closed meeting agenda, presentation, discussion of information upon pricing and purchase power generation and fuel and their impact upon the fuel purchase, energy, and marketing charge. Okay, can I have a motion to go into close?
I motion.
I'll second it. All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Okay, we will be back.
The time is 2:15.
ready. Okay, it is 2:27, and we are reconvening in our open meeting. There was no action taken in our closed meeting. The next item, discussion or request for any future agenda items.
Nope,
Okay.
this
Ma-
time.
I have entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn?
Second, all those in favor?
Aye?
All right, thank you, everybody.